Chifley Square, located in a major financial hub, is what can be best described as transformative. In the long term, its design intentions have shifted throughout the decades, and in the short term, its users throughout the times of day and days of the week transform. Chifley Square is an exemplar for how urban space is dynamic, contested, and always becoming. Chifley Square, just south of Circular Quay, is at the junction of Phillip Street and Hunter Street. The open space is created by the surrounding buildings. At its south is 8 Chifley, and at its northwest and northeast respectively is Qantas House and Chifley Tower, whose curved exteriors creates Chifley Square's unique circumference. Since 2024, Chifley Square has been under construction as the new Chifley South Tower is built, so urban observations were completed along the space parallel to Phillip Street and the open space under 8 Chifley, designed as an extension to the original Chifley Square. The intentions of designers of all 3 buildings has differed due to their context, time and vision, subsequently having an impact on the shared urban space of Chifley Square, which has transformed across the decades. In the early 20th century, the City of Sydney Council devised to modernise the junction, adopting a plan to create a Parisian Haussmannian-style geometric plaza, large elegant buildings with stone facades and wrought iron details. Little of this initial conceptualisation remains, firstly because of the constant change in designers throughout the decades, and secondly, the construction of Chifley Tower in the 1980s saw an influx of individuals from the finance sector move into the space. This meant the essence of Parisian style, artistic, elegant and ornamental charm was lost. In 1957, Qantas House was completed with a curved frontage conforming to the planned plaza, and when Chifley Tower was planned, it was designed with a curved facade to mirror that of Qantas House, completing the semicircular curve of the planned square. New York-based architects used sandstone, marble and steel on Chifley Tower to mimic the Art Deco buildings of their home city. Chifley Square transformed yet again to 21st century ideals with the construction of 8 Chifley in 2013. Cafes extend out of the neighbouring lanes into the lower level plaza and the elevated platforms to bring focus and energy to the public realm. The transformation of Chifley Square can be seen simply through the course of a day, beginning with the first phase, the coffee break. The 2 main categories of people at this time of observation are the construction worker and the office worker. The flow of people out into the space during this time is perfect for the observation of certain peculiar habits of this last category of people when provided with a short retreat from work in the office. Surprisingly, the majority of office workers from Chifley Tower do not dwell in Chifley Square, but will walk the next block over to retrieve their coffee before heading straight back to the building. If not to first dwell hesitantly at the entrance to chat with co-workers. White supports this characteristic in his book on urban spaces, saying that there may be relatively few patrons from the plaza's own building, as some secretaries confide, they'd just as soon put a little distance between themselves and the boss. For those who are not as fortunate, work is not confined to the office, but bleeds out and into the public space. The Chifley Tower entrance is a hotspot for work conversations, but many also choose to walk and talk for their coffee run. Work conversations continue into the public space, so there is no distinct barrier between the office and leisure. The entrance to Chifley Tower is distinctive for its portico, whose towering columns show a number of peculiarities of human behaviour in urban space. White says people show an inclination to station themselves near objects, such as a flagpole or a statue. They like well-defined places, such as steps, or the border of a pool. The preference for pillars might be ascribed to some primeval instinct. You have a full view of all corners, but your rear is covered. The Chifley Tower portico also provides a space for office workers to leave the confines of the office and find privacy within the openness of the public space. People tend to find small nooks and crannies as what Goffman in 1963 calls involvement shields, a tool to have privacy in public. Phones are also used as means to achieve what Goffman also coined situational withdrawal. Turning the public space into the private space, phones can be used habitually to insulate the individual from the social diversity of urban public spaces. The street curb observer is typically seen in the second category of person to habit the space at this time, and that is the construction worker. Street curb observation is also often performed by smokers, and as White says, there is an inclination for men in general to line up at the curb. Typically they face inwards, toward the sidewalk with their backs exposed to the dangers of the street. During the small distance commutes of the coffee break, there is a clear example of the space not being used as intended. Many people cross the traffic island on Phillip Street in their rush from the office. Even with a dedicated pedestrian crossing a few meters down. Again, a frequenter of the Chifley Tower portico is the smoker. But none seem to notice the strict no smoking sign. Lunchtime sees a cluster of people in 8 Chifley's raised plaza, an extension of Chifley Square. Noticeably, people sit here for lunch during this cold winter's day. A sun analysis of the square during the winter solstice shows that 8 Chifley is basked in sun exactly at 12 p.m, perfect for the office workers' lunch. Here shows a harmonious union between what is conceived and lived in Lefebvre's conceptual triad, as the architects of 8 Chifley design a space understanding people's attraction to sitting in the sun, and so incorporate a lunch sitting area at the base of the building to always be illuminated in sun every day at 12 p.m. Studies of the space were plotted on a diagram. Through this, clear patterns emerged. For example, people who were using technology like phones or laptops were always alone and more often than not chose to sit at the large centre table. Notably, this table also has tall plants in its centre, probably providing more privacy for these individuals, whereas people in groups chose to sit at the smaller tables and were never engaging in technology, but instead eating their lunch and conversing. Investigation was made into the online presence of Chifley Square. Images scraped from Instagram show 7 clusters, with the largest categories being of coffee, photos of the 8 Chifley building, and food. Secondly, 251 reviews of Chifley Square were scraped from Google. The most mentioned word was food. Lunch and shopping were also frequently used words. It's important to note that all these reviews and Instagram photos are dated before construction began on Chifley Square in early 2024. This creates an interesting rift between what Chifley Square once was, before construction, and what it is now, during construction. Also, what is perceived online and what is lived in person. A distinct part of all 21st century urban space is what I'd coined in 2009 as background relations between humans and technology. Jenny Holz's art installation on the 19-metre tall steel columns on 8 Chifley Square embodies this. The streetscape is altered by this monumental artwork and shows how background relations have become synonymous with 21st century urban environments. Macquarie in his book Geomedia says, publicly situated screens create specific viewing situations that are deeply implicated in urban rhythms and routines. At 5 p.m, these office workers exit the Chifley Tower, but now with their coats and bags. The pedestrian path along Phillip Street becomes a thoroughfare towards Wynyard Station. A new category of people also emerges at this time. Locals coming out for an evening run, or groups of young families coming out for dinner. The only category of person to persist through to the weekend is the construction worker. They even spread more throughout the space, as the lack of crowds and quieter traffic means they can accelerate construction and close off some pedestrian paths. The office worker no longer occupies the space and is now replaced with a new category of people. The weekender. The weekenders are made up of runners, dog walkers, families, friends, museum goers, and tourists. Unlike the office workers who use the space to commute, stop and chat, have a smoke break, grab coffee or lunch, or simply have a break to scroll their phone, the weekender purely uses the space as a means of passage. The portico of Chifley Tower, stopped at frequently during the week, is now ignored on the weekend as the footpath along Phillip Street becomes a passageway for recreations a couple 500 metres down. Museum of Sydney, Circular Quay, markets and cafes. Different to what Chifley Square's online presence may show, cafes in its immediate vicinity are closed, eating areas are blocked, recreational use of the space is nowhere to be seen. Here, there is a disjunction between what is perceived and lived. It will be interesting to see how this could be set to change in 2027 when construction finishes, and Chifley Square goes through yet another transformation.